many of our past guests have touted Nepal as their favorite place in the world, a place that they return to again and again. Even though there's so many new places to explore, something keeps drawing them back. But most people that go there tend to hike around and up to Everest Base Camp like we did in our previous episode. Today we're going to go to Nepal, but we're going to go to a different section. It's a doable but difficult circuit that's held in the valley that's surrounded by these giant and majestic mountains. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures Podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks, where every other Thursday on the Active Travel Adventures Podcast, I bring you an exciting new adventure. I believe that if you want a kick-ass life, adding adventure travel to your life is a must. You not only get to see some of the world's most remarkable landscapes and meet some of the coolest people, adventure travel makes you feel empowered and helps you tackle some of the biggest challenges in your everyday life. So come along for another great adventure on today's Active Travel Adventures Podcast. Today we'll be trekking the Annapurna Sanctuary Circuit. We'll talk a little bit about Kathmandu, that crazy town that everybody just loves to go to, and the benefits of adventure travel. We're going to head to the magical Himalayan mountains of Nepal. Nepal is located north and west of India, west of my beloved Bhutan that I'm going back to again next year and so excited about, south of Tibet, and north and west of the Everest area in Nepal. The Annapurna Sanctuary is a high glacial basin that's about 20 miles south of the town of Pokhara. This plateau is high, about 4,000 meters or about 12,000 feet elevation, and it's surrounded by a ring of huge mountains called the Annapurna Range. Most of these mountains are over 21,000 feet. Of course, we're not climbing up these high mountains, we're going in the valley looking up at the mountains. Oddly, I guess it makes sense though, is because it's surrounded by such tall mountains, in the summertime, even then, it still doesn't get a whole lot of sunlight, maybe about 7 hours a day. But this also creates some really cool ecosystems, so there's lots of cool things to see in addition to these massive mountains. The mountains themselves are considered holy by the local Gurung people. They consider it sacred. The local Hindus and Buddhists also believe it to be the home of many of their deities, and they consider the plumes of the clouds that come above the mountains as the smoke of their holy incense. So today we're going to be talking to a gentleman who is incredible. He's 72 years old, is still rocking it with adventure travel, and he did this amazing adventure. So let's get started and head back to Nepal, but this time to the Annapurna Sanctuary. Stan, if we could start by just introducing yourself, maybe tell us a little bit about your background.
My name is Stan Jacobson. I'm 72 years old, born and raised in southern Minnesota and lived here all my life. And I have 3 children who live nearby that are grown. I worked at the Mayo Clinic as a hospital pharmacist, and I retired 12 years ago, but I still work every Thursday so I can afford to go on adventures. I love to travel.
That sounds great. How did you get into adventure travel?
I've always been intrigued by mountains, and so when our kids were little, we would always go west to the Rocky Mountains. And it was just a slow progression of doing a hike in the Grand Tetons and just stumbling on the Exum climbing school and being intrigued by that. And I think it was the next year in like 1987, me and my best friend were at the Exum climbing school and ended up climbing the Grand Teton. And it just one gradual step after another like that. And then I can't exactly remember how, but we decided to go to Machu Picchu. This would have been in 2014. And myself and some other friends of mine, and we put the spreadsheet together and compared what we wanted to do with the cost, the number of days, and what each company offered. So we had I think there were 7 companies, and we ended up going with Active Adventures, and it was just a knock your socks off trip to Machu Picchu in South America. And then continued on and went to Patagonia with them. And the latest was last fall when I went to Nepal with them.
Very, very cool. It sounds like you found them the same way. I wanted to do research because I want my recommendations to be companies that I feel very strongly about. And I just have been blown away with the quality of their tours, their people, and that's why I promote them, because you cannot buy promotion on this program. I don't sell advertising, so
Okay.
got to be companies that I believe in, and
Yes.
Active is high up on the list. So cool.
Yes.
So what is it about adventure travel itself that rocks your boat? What are you getting out of adventure travel?
That's an excellent question. Way back when I got interested in running, and I discovered along the way that the harder you work at something, the more you appreciate it. And that holds true for, well, let's say hiking. It's not totally true, but fundamentally, the more effort you put into it, let's say you're going to go on a hike, that the more you're going to appreciate, and you'll feel a sense of accomplishment afterwards. That and photography is a hobby of mine. My wife says it's a disease with me. I love to take pictures, and when you're hiking versus biking or canoeing or anything like that, you can have your camera in hand, so you can shoot at will, if you understand what I'm saying. So that played into it also.
Yeah, I find too, it's the feeling of accomplishment. It boosts my self-confidence, my self-esteem. Plus, you get to see all the pretty places too that are hard to get to.
That's true.
By roads, many places.
Very true.
So,
mm-hmm.
Now, before we even met, I did not realize that you were in your early 70s, and you chose a particularly difficult challenge by going to Annapurna, which is our topic for today.
Yeah. What
on earth made you choose that?
Well, because I've always wanted to see the Himalayas. And what do I want to say? Since my middle 30s, I've always been very, very active physically. I saw my father pass away. He dropped dead in front of my eyes when I was 14 years old. He was 52 years old at the time. And, well, this sounds silly, but that really leaves an impression on you.
Well, how can it not? Sure.
Yeah. And so I actually lived 52 years wondering if I was going to live as long as my father did. I used to smoke cigarettes, and I knew that I just couldn't continue to do that. And I had read a book, I think I was 33 years old. It was called On Running and Being by George Sheehan. And it was more of a philosophical way of life versus a physical endeavor that he explained. And I said, that is me. So I went to a little park near here and ran basically across the street, and had goo running out of my nose and my eyes. But I stuck with it, and that was a turning point for me. I always said I'd give $1,000 to anybody who told me I never wanted another cigarette. And running did that for me. You can't run and smoke at the same time.
That's funny. I used to be a smoker as well. And when I hate to run, I love to walk, I love to hike, but I hate to run. But I wanted to learn how to do it for whatever different reasons. But how I end up doing is I'd walk to 2 telephone poles in my neighborhood, then run to the next one. And eventually I was able to go all the way around.
I think I've done that in the early days as well.
I was like, I can see that telephone pole. I can make it to the telephone pole.
Exactly. Well, so it was running changed the whole trajectory of my life. So running's always been my first love. I can't really do it anymore either, but I do other things to maintain some muscle tone and a lot of cardiac stuff.
Oh, good. Well, how did you train for this adventure?
I didn't.
Whoa.
I didn't feel... I maybe underestimated a little, but I didn't do anything extraordinary for it other than, sometimes I spend an hour on a stair climber. So
So your daily life is actually training.
Yeah. So I don't know if I had stepped it up anymore, I might have injured myself, so.
True.
So I keep a pretty high background level of fitness. So.
Oh, cool.
Yep.
So today we're talking about Annapurna, and Annapurna, which I have just learned about only in the last couple of months, is also over in Nepal. Can you tell us a little bit about just a brief overview, and then we'll get into some more details about the visit itself?
Well, basically, if we flew into Kathmandu, we flew in a couple of days earlier. Kathmandu was landing on another planet. It is just an explosion of the senses. It's this bustling city, a whole nother culture. But anyway, that's where we started. That's where we met our active adventure guide. Stayed there. Like I said, we went a couple of nights early, but then we left from Kathmandu, flew from Kathmandu which is about 1.5 million people, I believe, to a smaller town called Pokhara. And my sense of Pokhara was about 200,000 people. It's kind of it's a stepping off point, another stepping off point for adventures in the Himalayas. And I also believe it seems to be kind of a religious mecca. There was a Buddhist stupa up on a hill. And in any event, then we took this half-hour flight to Pokhara. I'm told that it's an 8.5-hour drive if you were to get in a van and drive there. And then the next day, we got in a van and drove to another small city. Well, it's just a settlement more. I think it was called Nepal. And by van, that was about an hour and a half. And got our gear loaded up, met our partners. And then it was basically 5 days hiking up this valley that the Modi River runs in to the head of the valley. And then stayed at the head of the valley in a tea house. And then our biggest day of the whole trip, then we got up at 4 a.m, went up to Annapurna Base Camp, back down to the tea house that we'd stayed in. And then, well, where am I at? That was on the 6th day. And then 7, 8, and 9, we're hiking back down the valley. We crossed over to the other side of the river. And the last day and a half or so, we're on the other side of the river. Hiked out, back to Pokhara, back to Kathmandu, and back home.
Very cool. So let's unpack that a little bit. Let's start at Kathmandu. You said that was an explosion of the senses. Can you give us a little bit more detail about what you saw, what you smelled, what you tasted?
Organized chaos, because we got into a van that was taking us from the airport to the hotel we were staying, which was right in the center of the city in a district called the Tamil district. And the streets are very narrow. There's all manner of cars, lots and lots of motorcycles, rickshaws, pedestrians, and you're driving on the left side of the road, which Americans are not used to. But that didn't seem to make a whole lot of difference. That's where the majority of the traffic went. It was just not congested. There seemed to be these unwritten rules so you could get through. But like I said, there were cars, motorcycles, people, bicycles everywhere. And that was like, my son and I we kept looking at each other saying, like, can you believe this? And our hotel, that was, like I said, right in the center of Kathmandu, just full of shops, little bitty mom and pop shops, sold everything under the sun. And the street our hotel on was extremely narrow. It'd be more comparable to an alley. And it was just clogged with people. When you would walk along there, once in a while you'd get bumped by a car or a motorcycle. But they're not going fast because they can't go fast. But they're trying to work their way through all the other traffic. That was another thing. I practiced yoga for a couple of years. And what I looked forward to as the end was the Shavasana, where you just lay on your back and try to go a small bit of meditation. And our practice leader would always end by saying namaste. I didn't realize it, but when you're greeted in Nepal, people greet you by saying namaste. And they also put palms together at heart center often. And I think between the airport and getting to our hotel, I think we had a dozen people say namaste to us.
Are the people nice?
Yeah, if they caught your eye, if you caught the eye of the person who was coming to you, they would say namaste. And with a smile, it was a very welcoming community.
Very cool. Do they have a colorful dress like I saw in Bhutan? Because when I was in Bhutan, I was like, my gosh, it was like another planet, or just everybody, the culture was just so different than what I'm used to.
There were those. We didn't see a lot of the local religious people would really get exotic with the long beards and I'm not going to say togas, but yeah, you could tell, you could spot a European or an American a mile away. But it's hard to describe. The women were more in like saris often. The men, not so much all the time, but a lot of vests were worn. And they had a little round cap that was very distinctive. All kinds of decorations on them. They all varied. Yeah, that was interesting, to say the least.
I saw just looking at your itinerary, the first day and a half, that looks pretty steep. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that was one of the downsides. I started off on my left foot, I'm right-footed. The night before, we had a get-together dinner in Pokhara to get acquainted with our tour group, and something I ate didn't agree with me, and I was really sick during the night. And during the van ride from Pokhara to the start of it, I didn't know if I was going to be able to start, but I just darn determined that I would. And the first day it was warm, but it wasn't particularly steep. And I was pretty shaky. Plus, the idiot that I am, I put a large camera and a large lens in my day pack. Our porters carried the bulk of our gear. So I got through the first day, and then the second day it was very warm again. I'm talking 90 degrees and sunny. And that's towards the end of that day, it started getting really, really steep. From the last rest stop to the tea house that we were going to stay at, I said that you could see it up above us on the ridge top. And I said, that's it up there. And our guide, her name is Button, nickname is Button, said, yep, straight up there. And she was right. So that was a hard start for me. But then I started feeling better after that. We were at higher elevation. It was cooler.
Good. Yeah, because it looks like you're going anywhere between 3 and 10 miles a day, and I guess depending on the difficulty of the trail. And you said a little bit, the trail is not a trail like we would consider a trail. Talk about that, please.
Well, it's steps. Probably 90% of it is stone steps. And if I've hiked the Inca Trail, Incas built steps. And if you think about it, a step, you have to raise your foot each step, okay? Versus a trail where you can swing your feet. It's more like walking. Well, going up steps after a while gets very, very tedious. And some of these were steep and they were long. It was like stairways to heaven.
And was it heaven when you get to the top?
Yeah. You know, I got to say, you hear me complaining about being sick and the stair. All of that recedes at the end of the trip, and you only think about the grandeur and the magnificence and what you've done and the accomplishments. So all of that is minor now. At the time, it was pretty big stuff. But
at the end of the day, were you proud of yourself, or talk about what did you feel like at the end of the day?
Well, yeah. So I don't sit around too much because I'm walking around looking with my camera. And we would have time to come some of the shorter days. We would get done rather early, and you'd have time to relax and get the camera out and et cetera, get cleaned up. And so I was often out and about around the trail at the end of the day's hike.
How are you feeling inside? That's trekking up a lot of stairs.
After the first 2 days, wow, I was all into it. Yep, I was just hoping that the good weather, we had excellent weather, that we would have clear skies, and that continued. So I was pretty jazzed up, pumped up after the second day. Yep.
And you're doing a circuit, so you're I'm going to mispronounce this, I'm sure, that the matcha, say that fishtail thing for me.
Yeah, at the head of the valley that we were going up, on the right-hand side would have been Machu Picchu, which the nickname for that is fishtail. I believe it's like 22,000 feet tall, and it's very precipitous. And instead of coming to single peak. It comes kind of to a double peak, and it looks very much like a fishtail, hence its nickname. And then on the other side of the valley, up a small side valley, sits Annapurna South, Annapurna, and Annapurna 1. Annapurna 1 is the first 8,000 plus peak that was ever climbed in 1950 something. So they're kind of sister peaks.
8,000 feet or 8,000 meter?
What did I say? 8,000 meter. 8,000 meter. Yeah.
Because I think that the fishtail is up over 20 something thousand. You never went any higher than 13.5.
Right. Yep.
So you can see the peaks all around you, even though you're up high. You still see these, I guess it's granite peaks, or to tell us a little bit about what the landscape looked like, what you're seeing.
Yeah, Machu Picchu is iconic. It can be, when we did the van ride from Pokhara to this Nayapul, we didn't know it at the time, but that we could see, actually you could see it from Pokhara. If the skies were clear, you could see Fishtail Mountain. And at the beginning, and off and on during the trek, also you could see not only Fishtail, but also Annapurna South, which was, our goal was to get to the base camp below Annapurna South. Yeah, you'd see them off and on from a distance, and they're just spectacular. I had one of those, my jaw drop moments. I told you about that steep uphill on the end of the second day. Well, I think the name of the tea house was called Chumrung. It sits up on a ridge, way up on a ridge. I sat down, got my pack off, and there are buildings on either side of the trail. And just kind of like, okay, just sauntered past the end of the buildings, and I looked up, and there was Annapurna South, was just gorgeous, just dominating the landscape. My jaw just dropped. I said to my son, "You've got to come see this," because it was so spectacular.
Go back to the tea houses. So these are family owned and operated, or
So these tea houses are kind of like hostels, small. They would have a series of several rooms, and they'd have 2 beds in each one of them, and then there would be communal toilets and communal showers. Everybody used the same. A dining room and a kitchen. And they may all be contiguous, or some of them are separate. No two are the same. Oh, and the toilets they were all different, let me put it that way. And we learned some of them even had a European-style toilet versus squat toilets, which were highly desired. And the shower rooms were, some of them, all of them had solar heat, like a black tank up on the roof that was heated by the rays of the sun. Some of them had propane heating also, gas heating. And those were much desired because you didn't have to be the first one in the shower to get hot water, because it would last, So we had 2 beds in each one, and then the porters, along with the local people who were running the tea house, would do our dinner and or food or whatever. And then they'd always have a dining room that the group could get together and eat in.
Very good. Tell us a little bit about your group.
Well, let's see, there were 10 of us, a couple from Canada, and they were a little bit younger than I was, recently retired, as I recall. Another retired couple from St. Paul, Minnesota, a younger couple from Michigan, and 2 single ladies who knew each other. And they were from out west. I can't remember exactly where right now.
Good. So a nice mix.
Yeah, we had a good mix.
So you had porters. If you're staying in tea houses at night, what are the porters carrying?
Well, they would carry, so we put all our extra clothes and gear into a very large duffel bag. And each one of those porters would then take 2 duffel bags. So we had 5 porters, so there were 10 of us. So we had that's what they would carry. It turned out to be quite a bit of a weight. They gave us guidelines on how much weight we could put in those, and I can't remember what that was, but they were carrying a considerable considerable amount of weight.
And they carry it in a funny way, too.
Yeah, they carry them basically in just a large, I can't remember what it would be made. It would be like a large bag, and there weren't shoulder straps on it like you and I would be thinking. What they had was a cloth band. It would be cloth that had been folded over itself several times, and then it was tied onto the pack with just very heavy twine, thin rope, and wrapped around their pack, and then that went over their forehead, and they carried that thing as a tump line, and that's all they had was this tump line carrying this huge pack that they had.
So it's got to be hard in the neck, I would think.
Yeah, yeah. One of our porters was had been a Sherpa. He was a Sherpa and had been on climbing trips to Mount Everest. So, and I can't remember. I think he was up to the final camp once. I don't think he ever went up to the top. But maybe 150 pounds at the most. And I had occasion to, put my arm around his shoulder. He was made of steel. Yeah.
Because you didn't have no pack animals. It's all human transported.
Right. We would see some pack animals, but they were carrying large propane tanks, something that would be physically impossible for a human being to carry. Like our porters told me, we saw other porters just carrying material things constantly. So everything that you see, that one would see in that valley, all the building material, everything was brought in by a human porter. So we saw people carrying like 3 or 4 sheets of 4x8 plywood, just huge, huge loads. It never failed to amaze me.
So the trail is the road. There is no road.
Early on the first day and on the very last day, we were on a quote-unquote road.
Wow.
You may or may not drive your car on it if you were there, but there was some 4-wheel drive traffic. Between the first day and the last day, it was trails. Yeah.
So are you going through villages, or tell us what you're seeing besides the mountains along your ways?
There were, I'm going to put it more like structures and very small settlements. You wouldn't really, along the way that you would pass through some from time to time. And they'd also, as often as not, have a tea house located with them. It was just that we weren't staying there that night. And they would have small stores that would sell just the rudimentaries, like things that hikers would want. Gatorade, chips, those kinds of things. But very, very small quantities. And I'm hard-pressed to call them a town or a village. They were a gathering of buildings. And you realize these are all hand-built. A lot of them had been there for a long time. And the farmers, the people that would live there, lived in those buildings also.
Now, and you start off in vegetative areas before you go above tree line. So they did have some building materials kind of near.
Oh, the only thing we saw was a quarry where they had they had chipped out large flat pieces of, I believe it was slate, that they could use for building material. And there were piles of that. But that was the only construction type thing we saw. Other than we did see some people carrying these 4x8 sheets of plywood and long, I'm going to say 10 to 12 foot beams of like 4x4s.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It was an eye opener.
Now, where was the monkey temple?
That is in Kathmandu.
Okay. And what is the monkey temple?
Well, it has a Buddhist stupa up, which is a place where Buddhists come to worship, and a lot of religious things that people come to see. And I can't tell you the meaning of those but a building with prayer wheels, and it's up on a hilltop, and it's infested with monkeys. They're just everywhere. On the top, very top, was very ornate stupa and very ornate buildings around it. Souvenirs are sold up there as well. Yeah.
And if the stupa is the same as in Bhutan, I liken it to a miniature, some kind of either a stone or something like a circus tent. So it's in that kind of a shape with a little pointy top. And at the bottom is an opening where they insert a prayer, and the stupas are prayers sent out to all sentient beings.
Okay.
Does that sound like something that you heard there?
Two that I saw were very large structures.
Yeah, I've seen some big ones, but I have a little one I actually have in my kitchen. So we'd see little pockets in the mountains of just hundreds of little stupas that people had placed there.
Okay.
And then there's some large ones at the Dokala Pass where it was a more permanent structure.
These were I kind of like a thimble that had a pointed top, but they were large structures. Yeah, like a story or two high.
Oh wow, yours are much bigger than the ones I saw.
So that was they call it the monkey. What do they call it? Monkey Palace. Yeah, it had a Buddhist name, but I can't pronounce that.
But the monkeys have kind of taken over. Were they friendly?
They took all of our water bottles. Our guide took all our water bottles, and they were friendly, but they said don't try and just ignore them. And because apparently they're attracted to those water bottles and try to take them, and if you grab onto them, they will win one way or another. Apparently,
right? Yeah, they can bite you.
Yeah. And he said you didn't want to get scratched by one because it can take months to heal. They said.
And you don't want any kind of injury in that country anyway, I'm sure. So.
Yeah. No.
But now, when you were tired at the end of the day, there was a hot spring at least one place along the way, right?
Yes. Yeah, although we didn't go down there. It would have been an option. That was our very, very longest day. We were 10 hours on the trail, had been up at 4 a.m. to hike. Let me back up. At the head of the valley was Machu Picchu Base Camp, the Fishtail Base Camp. We stayed there on the 5th night. And on the day of the 6th day, we got up at 4 a.m. in the dark, to go a mile or a kilometer and a half or so uphill to the Annapurna Base Camp. That was the goal of the trip, to be up there for the sunrise. And so that was at 4 a.m. You're up 1.5 kilometers roughly uphill, see the sunrise, come back down to Machu Picchu Base Camp. And then we had breakfast there, got all our gear back together, and then went way down the mountainside to the place that had that spring. And we were pretty well fried by the end of that day. So no one went to the spring. We just sat. I think you could buy a beer there, and I had one. Yeah.
There you go. So how did you feel when you'd gotten back down that mountain?
So on day 5, I have a nasty habit of not drinking enough. And I don't think I drank enough fluid. And on day 5, when we were to arrive at Machu Picchu Base Camp at the head of the valley, I started not feeling well. I think it maybe was dehydration and maybe altitude sickness. And it got to the point where I didn't even go to dinner that night. You have that feeling, all I want to do is be curled up in my sleeping bag. That's all I wanted. So the next day, the next morning, when we hit the trail before sunlight, it was just all I could do to bring myself to do that. So they had one of the porters carry my day pack, and the rest of the group went ahead. And I really did just take a step or two at a time and then stop. And by sheer power of will, I got up to the Machu Picchu Base Camp. My son breathed a huge sigh of relief because he knew how disappointed I'd be if I hadn't got up there. And then our guide, bless her heart, got me into the tea house and gave me a little pep talk. She says, drink all the tea you can drink here. Just keep drinking. and just keep remembering that now when we go down, we lose elevation, and I'm just hoping that you'll start to feel better. Because I was seriously like, how am I going to get off of this mountain? Because I knew this was our longest day. Well, the teeth started turning it around, and then I started feeling much better. Not whole yet, but by the time we got back down to Machu Picchu base camp, I felt great. I mean, not great, but good. I like confident. Let's put it that way.
So I'm taking it you didn't use one of the water bladders.
I did not. I have one, and I left it at home. Yeah.
Is that something you would recommend to make sure you don't get dehydrated? Because dehydration can also cause a little bit of altitude sickness.
Yeah, no, I would highly recommend. I would do. The reason I don't carry that is I have a lot of expensive camera gear, and I have this feeling that what if I pop the bladder, and ruin my camera gear. So that would really ruin the trip for me. So, but all that aside, I did not drink enough. My pack was not convenient to get to the water. My water, I've since gotten a new pack, and I did not drink enough. My son had these little, he let me use a few of them. Is it called Crystal Light? Little tubes of powder that you put in your water. And I wish I had brought those along because the water just tastes so much better that way. You just drink a little more, I think, when it's flavored. In my case,
I think we all tend to underhydrate ourselves, and it really makes a big difference in your energy level as well as your ability to handle the altitude. Well, it sounds like Button was a big supporter too. Button, your guide. Tell us a little bit about your guides.
Yeah, so we had Button was the Amanda Sutton, I think was her full name. But yeah, she was our active adventures guide. And then the secondary local guide was Amrit, I think his name was. He used to be a porter. So Button maintained just the right pace for the group, was very attentive to everyone, how they were feeling. She would actually push water, but I ignored her to my detriment. But I mean, not push water, but advocate drinking. Drink a lot. And was a good, there were other people that had minor stomach ailments from here and again, and she had a little pack of medicines for everybody, and blisters. So I cannot say enough about Active Adventures guides. I had the same one for the 2 trips that I did in South America, the same guide. And there just isn't a better person on the planet. Just delightful people.
Well, I like they use their own employees, so they just don't subcontract out. So they know exactly who's going on each trip with you, in addition to having a local guide as well.
Yeah.
I think it's important.
Yeah, I do too. They're just stellar. And if anyone's thinking of hesitating about hiring, let's say let's just say Active Adventures, my experience is I always go a day or 2 early and get your kind of feet on the ground, so to speak, get your bearings. But once you meet your guide, you can just totally relax because they have all the dinners arranged. They know when to leave to get to walk to the local restaurant. So you just hand yourself over to them and everything is taken care of. All you got to think about is the adventure you're about to partake in and wallow in the adventure.
Yep, very cool. Yeah, I like particularly with adventure travel because it can be so difficult to figure out the logistics on your own. I now either, like I went to Pisgah National Forest and I went there and let the visitor center plan my whole week for me, or I'll hire somebody like Active and then all I have to do is just show up and participate. I am totally sold on having others make the arrangements for me. Like all of us, I'm so swamped, I don't have the time to do it anyway. And like I said, logistics are so difficult on adventure travel that I'm just totally on board with this.
Yeah, I swear that when we flew from Kathmandu to Pokhara, That was not they have two airport buildings. One is the international flights and one is the domestic flights. Well, the domestic airport, it was just throngs of people and people talking loud, and the overhead would come on and I couldn't understand what they were saying. And just, and a lot of trekking people also, piles of gear. And I don't know how you would fend your way through that airport without a guide, because our flight was supposed to go, I think, at like 10:30 in the morning, and no, it goes when it goes, and it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon before it went, and they were perfectly at ease with that, and so the guide, just that part was invaluable.
Right, and they know when they need to put in the cushions, so they know where the glitches can be.
Yeah.
Very cool. What surprised you about this adventure? One,
Kathmandu surprised me. I really did not have any preconceived notion of what that city was like, and I just love to go back there. We drove quite some distance away from it on the way to the airport, but they do cremate bodies along the river that runs through there, and there's a big temple, and we could see the smoke rising from a cremation. And a friend of mine had been there, not on an active adventure, but just in Kathmandu. And he said that you really need to see that. Well, I only saw that from a distance. And I would love to go back to just Kathmandu. And then Pokhara is kind of, like I said, this religious center. And we were there. Apparently there are 103 holidays in Nepal in a year. And when we got done with our trip, it was a holiday, and there were just throngs of people, and it is so interesting, cattle wandering around. And there were a lot of people in, I'm going to say, religious dress, not only the women, but men also, entirely foreign to me. Yeah. But everybody's nice, they're wonderful people. Yeah.
Is there anything you wish you had known before you gone over there?
No, I can't say that. No.
And what advice would you give somebody that's considering trekking in Annapurna?
Well, one, if you're not physically fit, I would do, get as fit as you can. If you travel with, let's say, active adventures, like I mentioned, they have their guide and then their secondary guide. Their guide is at the front. The secondary guide is with the last, at the rear of your hiking group. And I've always been on all three trips with them. There have been people who lag back. And because I like to take pictures, I often would hike back with them because we'd stop a little more often and I could use my camera. So, but I would still be, the more fit you can be, the more you would enjoy your trip for sure. Because there are some trying sets of stairs, let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it looked like a very challenging trek. On a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being, say, Machu Picchu difficult, where would you land this?
I would say it was the Inca Trail, and this were on a par. Yeah.
So on a scale of 1 to 5, would you put this at a 4 or a 5?
As far as difficulty, and I put it at 4.
Do you have a favorite memory or a story about your trip? Like if I said, "Oh, tell me about your trip," what's the first thing that's going to come out of your mouth?
The Himalayas are magnificent. They are, and you don't have to get close to them to see them. I actually, after we had made the hike to Annapurna Base Camp, you're right underneath the thing. There's a valley between you and the mountain proper, and that's all cool and it's really nice. But you don't get this sense of how big they are in proportion to the landscape. So if you can go to see the Himalayas, I could recommend it wholeheartily.
And you're pretty well traveled. How would you, on a scale of 1 to 10, where would this adventure fit?
Well, I've traveled a lot, and I have to put all three of my active adventures, Machu Picchu, Patagonia, and this one, on a par. And not to say that I haven't been to places that were very, very cool, but you factor in, I had to work to do it. I was talking about that earlier. And that just adds, another measure of accomplishment, and you just feel good about it. So all three of those have been just humdingers in my ballpark.
And I've actually covered both of those adventures in previous podcasts, and I'll put links to those in the show notes.
Yeah.
But you forgot to answer the question, Stan. On a scale of 1 to 10, where does this adventure fit?
Oh. I have to factor in that I didn't feel well, and then I got, so that had, but it's right up there by a 10. I mean, it is just fantastic. You aren't going to see this any other place in the world or anything like it, I don't think.
Very cool. So no regrets about going, even though you did get a little sick.
No. Like I said, now those things those have receded. I only think about, wow, I did it. I was there. I know what it's like. We had good weather.
And you did something most people in the world can't even do, and you did that at 72. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Shoot, most people aren't even fit enough to do day one, not to mention the entire adventure.
No, I understand. I'm extremely fortunate. I'm very grateful.
It sounds like you work hard for your fitness too, so.
I do.
It's not all in good genes.
Yeah.
As much as I wish it could be.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, I might as well mention this. On day 2, on the last segment where it was hot and I had too much weight in my pack and it was steps and it was just uphill, right straight up to heaven, I did develop a little pain in my chest. But I ascribed it to that bad meal, and it didn't crop up again during the whole trip. But a month and a half after I got back home, I did have a stent placed in one of my coronary arteries, and that's what.
Oh, brother.
So, yeah. But I'd had 2 stents 20-some years ago. So if you got the bad DNA, no matter how much exercise you do, even if you eat. When I ate moderately well, exercise isn't a magic apple. So, but it sure helps. Yep.
That's for sure. Now, any last advice that you'd like to tell our listeners about your Annapurna trek?
Yeah. Oh, I know. Yes. Things did go wrong for me with eating right, having eaten bad food and also getting dehydrated / mountain sickness. And, I had watched a movie about Yvon Chouinard, the guy who founded Patagonia. It was a documentary. In there, he said something that stuck with me. He said that the adventure doesn't begin until something goes wrong. So that did add to my adventure, not feeling well, I have to say. But then Helen Keller also said that life is a daring adventure or it is nothing. So if you put those two together, you need to have something go wrong for your life to be worth something, I guess, or something like that.
Well, the stories always seem to come from when things go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And like I said, almost it's usually the mishaps and miscues and things that go awry that when you beat that challenge, like you had the fortitude to keep chugging along when you didn't feel well, or when things go wrong and you solve the problem or you get through it, that's when you feel like you've earned that pat on the back. Yeah.
After I'd eaten that meal and spent the night, not sleeping, very sick to my stomach, et cetera, it's like, oh no. But I got to get through it. How am I going to do this? And I just took it one step at a time. And now when I look back at it, I can only smile. Right? Yeah.
Well, you had to give yourself pep talks. What were you going through your head? Were you saying, I can do this, or how can I do this? Or what were you thinking?
All I knew is I was going to do the next thing. So that morning I needed to get my gear together and get it in the van. Once I got to the van, I just knew I needed to get the start of the trailhead. Okay, I'm going to start on the trail, and the rest is history. I got on the trail and it worked out.
It's your own little run to the light post, just like me. Well, that makes this a great place to stop. Let's all folks just try to make it to that next light post. Right, Stan?
Yeah. Oh, and I'd like to mention one other thing. back in I think it was 1987, the first time that I climbed the Grand Teton. We did it with Exum Guide, and it was with a friend of mine and my sister-in-law. And when we got up to the top of the Grand Teton, the guide said his advice to us was not even try to explain this to your friends because they'll never be able to understand what you've just done. And so you and I, we've tried to explain this, but I would just highly recommend that if you're thinking about doing something like this, to do it, because these words and the pictures you're going to post or whatever are just minuscule to the overwhelming magnitude and exhilaration you're going to feel doing something like this, for sure. I would like to go back and do another hike in that area, to be honest with you.
One last question. What's your next adventure?
I'm going to go to the Dolomites with Active Adventures in the fall of 2019.
Wonderful. That's a very popular episode I recently did myself, and I'll put links to that in the show notes as well. It sounds like you're hitting all the cool spots.
So, yeah. Well, I hope I can keep doing this for a little, but who knows what the next day is going to bring. So,
my mom did things until her mid-80s.
I love to hear good stuff like that.
And Mom didn't even get active until she was in her 50s. It started with tennis and then moved on to hiking, biking, and paddling well into her mid-80s. In fact, that's kind of similar to me. I didn't pick up hiking until I turned 50 when I decided I want to learn how to backpack so I could do some section hikes of the Appalachian Trail, and I fell in love with the mountains and I've never looked back. Goes to show there's hope for all of us, folks. It's all mind over matter and deciding you want to do it and just taking the baby steps and just doing like you said, just what's the next step I have to do to get to this goal?
Exactly. Yes.
Thank you so much for your time, Stan. It's been very interesting, and I look forward to hearing more of your adventures.
Well, thanks for having me.
Outside of wanting to go to Annapurna myself, I come away from this interview with a couple of key takeaways. The one thing that keeps coming back to me is that even when you do some difficult things when you adventure travel, that sometimes the suffering or the hardships or the sicknesses, whatnot, they end up fortifying you and strengthening you. When you look back and you tell the stories, or you think back on your memories, you're almost fond of them in some way, and they certainly become my favorite stories. You can even hear it in the tone of Stan's voice that, he kind of brushes off the fact that he had stomach illnesses and he had a little bit of the altitude sickness issues. And even when I think back on my altitude issue in Costa Rica, it's the same thing. I was proud of myself for being able to have, through sheer force of will, getting the job done, accomplishing my goal. Another key thing is that here's Stan at 72 years old, has outlived his father by 20 years, his father who died of a heart attack, and Stan himself had the heart issues both 20 years ago himself, around the same age as his father, and recently when he got back from the trip, just because he's taken such good care of himself and taken the time to keep energized, keep healthy, eat healthy, and stay engaged, he's been able to show us that we can change the trajectory of our heredity if we work at it. Another cool thing about adventure travel, that it makes it easy and fun to do so. Stan also mentioned that he's a photographer. On this week's website, which is activetraveladventures.com/Annapurna or /28, there are tons and tons of great photographs, so be sure to check those out. And I always mention, and you'll see the links in the show notes. If you don't know what a show note is, if you're listening to this podcast on an app, if you take your finger and you scroll down to the bottom, I've got some of the key points of the episode. I've got all the links that we mentioned, such as episodes that we've talked to in the past. So you can go directly there. Any links to, I'll put a link to the book that he talked about, etc. The show notes make it easy for you to access the information right away at your fingertips. I want to remind you, too, if you do go to Nepal, altitude is an issue. So be sure to go look at the Kilimanjaro series that we did. I do cover the altitude in depth there. And so pick up on some of those tips and stay hydrated. Super, super important. And like Stan says, bring one of those water bladders. It does encourage you to drink more water when it's right at up by your lapel. And lastly, I mentioned earlier in the show that I do not accept advertising, and I plan to never accept advertising for this program. I want to be in charge of who I promote. And so what I do instead of advertising is when I find companies that I truly believe in then I seek them out. And then I form what's called an affiliate partnership with them. And with an affiliate, I may or may not earn a commission. I may or may not get free or discounted travel. But whether or not I get any kind of a reimbursement or whatnot from these companies, these are the companies I know, like, and trust that I feel confident in recommending to you. But because some of these do offer some remuneration, I would appreciate if you are planning on using them anyway, please use the links on my website or in the show notes so that they know that you heard about them through the Active Travel Adventures podcast. It's a great way to show a little love and support for the work that we're doing here. I'd be really grateful. And remember, it doesn't cost you a dime. And to give you a little heads up, on our next episode, we're going to a fabulous country that I got to go to in the wintertime, but we're going to see what it's like to do some adventure in the summertime. We're going to Iceland. I was lucky enough to go to see the Northern Lights there several years ago with my sister, but we'll be back in 2 weeks with a great adventure in Iceland, and I can't wait to share it with you. Until then, this is Kit Parks, and Adventure On.